The big thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to rant a little bit about, is Trump begging for mercy from an imaginary army, encircling another imaginary army. I'm not joking. I'm not kidding. I don't know where he got this from, but Trump is inventing military formations in his head to surrender to. I didn't know how Trump was going to respond to Putin basically rejecting his ceasefire offer and offering new terms. And I knew when he said he sounded good, it was a good response. I knew it was going to be bad. I did not expect him to beg for mercy from an entirely manufactured crisis. I don't know if I feel like we should just start right there, because somebody in chat, I don't know if this is somebody who's been here before. He has the name Tommy Temper. That's a beautiful name. Trump does not beg. Lol. I don't know, man. I don't know what you call what Trump just did. We get straight into it. Honestly, I want to get straight into it. This is bizarre to me. Okay, so as many of you may know, Ukraine with the United States recently offered Russia a ceasefire. And it was a 30-day all across the line ceasefire. Originally, the Ukrainians were only supposed to offer a ceasefire that covered long-range missiles in the Black Sea from the reports I was reading. Okay, now maybe that was, and it's likely like a starting opening offer and it got moved around. Whatever it was, it ended up being this, a 30-day across-the-board ceasefire, covering artillery, covering infantry, covering long-range missiles, covering the Black Sea, covering Crimea, covering Donetsk, Luhansk, everything. So, all the guns shall cease. Now remember, Donald Trump said that he was going to end the war in 24 hours. And during the debate with Biden, he even said he would end the war before he entered the White House. Many of you may have forgotten that. I have not. He did say that during the debate. And so, even if this ceasefire worked, he would have, let's just say, under-delivered in his original commitment, considering thousands upon thousands of people have died since Donald Trump made that commitment. I mean, not only since he made that commitment, but since that commitment was supposed to be fulfilled when he won the election and then henceforth got inaugurated. And now we're 53, 54, 55 days into the 24-hour peace operation. Special peace operation, very special peace operation. But Zelensky said during that meeting with Donald Trump, and he gave this warning, Putin has violated 25 ceasefires. All of this idea about a ceasefire and peace is all good and dandy. What are we going to put into place to make him adhere to a ceasefire? And their response was like an economic deal with the Ukrainians, the minerals deal that they wanted. And I don't see how that brings certainty that the Russians won't bomb Ukraine. I mean, the idea, America has economic interest in Ukraine, so they would never bomb a country America has economic interest in. Did we not have economic interest in Ukraine before? What's so special about the minerals deal? A lot of these minerals, we don't even know how price effective they can be, extracted from the ground. No businesses has approached, no real serious large economic entity has approached starting one of these giant extraction projects. And so this extraction project that may or may not happen for some or all or maybe not many of the resources, depending on its feasibility, is supposed to be a strong enough security deterrent that Ukraine doesn't need alliances. You know what it is? Anytime you're trying to wiggle out of a security deterrent, it's because you don't want to be committed to it. The United States wants to just say economic deal, because if Russia invades again, which considering they've done it twice in the last decade is a real possibility, and I would even say a likely possibility, they don't want to be tied up in that. And so instead, they're trying to see if they can get away with economic commitment instead of real security commitment. Because they've already said they don't want to put troops on the ground. They've already excluded NATO membership before negotiations even started. So this is not a serious security deterrent. But Trump still wants that peace. Trump still wants to be able to go out there and say he's the peacemaker, he made the deal, and go forward with normalization. But he still needs to find a mechanism to do it without humiliating himself. And I'm going to talk about how he already is kind of humiliating himself in a bit, because we got some polling numbers, some of the first serious polling of how Americans are viewing Trump's Ukraine dovish peacemaking, whatever you want to call it, how they view it. But first, let's open with what happened is Trump sends the ceasefire, the Russians respond, and the response is no. Now, they didn't say no. What they said is like, oh, we'd love a ceasefire, but, and you know that when the but enters the conversation, there's going to be some asterisks, there's going to be some additions, and their additions was that the Ukrainians cannot mobilize during this 30-day ceasefire, meaning they cannot get manpower, which is the main issue in the Ukrainian armed forces. This manpower, as everybody acknowledges, they cannot continue to mobilize, and no aid. That means not only aid from the United States, but all aid to Ukraine has to be cut off for this 30-day period. There was no offer of a reciprocatory, oh, we're going to stop hiring new soldiers, we're going to stop taking in North Korean shells and North Korean soldiers. There was no offer of that. This seemed to be a unilateral standard imposed on Ukraine for this 30-day period, meaning that, A, if negotiations succeed, Ukraine's going to be in a weaker position each day negotiations go on, giving the Russians motivations to both drag it out to put Ukraine in a worse and worse position as they continue to mobilize, and Ukraine is essentially frozen militarily. And therefore, the end state will be a very, very bad negotiating position for the Ukrainians and a much stronger negotiating position for the Russians for whatever term that is brought about, which is almost certainly not going to be on terms favorable to Ukraine in any way. Unless the United States is willing to stick out its neck militarily, which so far, considering its economic offers of security guarantees, it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. Now, let's say it doesn't succeed and this fails. Well, then that means for 30 days, Ukraine could not deal with one of its main security problems, its manpower crisis, and it could not receive foreign aid from the United States or anyone. Remember, this is not, even though the United States is negotiating basically unilaterally here without Europe's input or very little European input, these security restrictions would affect the Europeans as well, even though Trump wants them to foot the bill for the security arrangement at the end of the day. And if there's going to be any peacekeepers from according to the Trump camp, it's going to have to be European ones. And the Russians, of course, reasserted anyway that there's going to be no European peacekeepers in Ukraine, no foreign soldiers in Ukraine. So there'll be no UN peacekeepers. There'll be no peacekeepers to stop the Russians if they want to engage again. And they're still demanding the annexation of new territory. Trump responded to this by saying it was a good response, but it was incomplete. And that scared me, because I don't know how you hear those words, no matter how complimentary they are towards you. If you have any concern whatsoever for how Ukraine looks at the end of this and think those were good words, because those were not good words. It was a complete rejection of Trump's peace offer, and then them just reintroducing their original terms. They even said as much. Putin said he wanted to address the root causes of the conflict, of the reason he invaded. So we're right back to the start, right back to his original terms. And he says it's a good response, but incomplete. And I was trying to figure out, was the incompletion all of the hogwash nonsense that was in there? Or the fact that he just didn't 100% commit to it? Because those two different reactions and what he meant by incomplete would drastically change the policy prescription. One could be, okay, we need to put more pressure on the Russians until they get realistic. And the other being, wow, we need to put more pressure on the Ukrainians until basically they disarm. So, I was knife's edge diplomatically, right? And then as I'm waiting for some explanation, some period at the end of the sentence so I can understand exactly what he meant by it was incomplete. Whether he was just trying to be nice while also still trying to engage the Russians and not trying to insult their nonsense in the same way he says he doesn't want to call Putin a dictator, or while calling Zelensky a dictator, or does he just not care? Which is a suspicion that I have. And then I wake up, I wipe, the dust out of my eyes, and I'm getting out of bed, I'm stretching, I'm opening my phone, and what do I see but a notification from the President of the United States of America? That is how the world knows this man. And he has now had a conversation with Putin. He has, not his advisors, Donald Trump himself. This is important. This was not a Marco Rubio conversation. This was not a Mike Waltz conversation. This was not anyone else conversation. Listen to what Donald Trump has to say. We had a very good and productive discussion with President Vladimir Putin of Russia yesterday. And there is a very good chance that this horrible, bloody war can finally come to an end. But at this very moment, all capitalized now, But at this very moment, thousands.
A curd is a curd.
Have you listened to Playboi Carti's new album?
Okay, that person. Can we ban that person? Thank you. I appreciate the $10. But at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position. I have strongly requested to President Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre, one not seen since World War II. God bless them all. What? 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 What is this? That was my reaction as I looked at this on my phone. Because I was just trying to think, where the fuck are the Ukrainians encircled? Where are they encircled? Well, look, I know people in all the hottest spots, just about, maybe not all of them, but at least 60 to 70 to 80% of them, right? And at the very least know press officers that cover basically all of the front. And if I don't, I know fixers that can get me in contact with them. And I'm looking around. I'm trying to find something through my personal contacts. I'm trying to find something online where I just missed something. I follow this war like almost semi-religiously at this point. And I'm looking everywhere to find out where the Ukrainians are encircled. And the only conclusion I can come around to or figure out is that he must be talking about Kursk. It can't be Toretsk, because the threat in Toretsk right now is the Russians being encircled because they've lost their positions rapidly. It can't be Pokrovsk because that, I mean, I'm making a documentary just about that battle, okay? If there's any part of the front that I know very well, it's the Pokrovsk battlefield. Everything, right? Not everything, but just about everything that I'm allowed to know and that's publicly available and that I can deem from private conversations. There's no threat of immediate encirclement. And he says here not, oh, they might get encircled. He says completely surrounded. So it can't be Pokrovsk because Pokrovsk is not completely surrounded. The Russians wanted to completely surround it last year, but they failed to. So it can't be Pokrovsk. It can't be on the Zaporizhzhia front. There's nowhere there that's comparable to this. I mean, they've abandoned Vasilino Vasilka weeks ago, and villages have fallen since then, but there's been no threat of encirclement. I mean, like, there's always the, like, 4 or 5 Ukrainians get captured. We get some footage of them getting executed because some Mavic drone was able to capture it by Russians that get that's like the most that I've seen from any of these fronts as of recent when it comes to Ukrainian encirclement. So what is he talking about? Not Volchansk, not Kharkiv. It's not Kupiansk. They still have a means to withdraw. They've held that. They stopped them from getting in there. So it has to be Kursk. And the only reason I think it can be Kursk is it's the only part of the front line where the Ukrainians are withdrawing. It's the only part of the front line where the Ukrainians are withdrawing at a speed that you could call it like a retreat. And not them slowly getting pushed back or generally holding the line. Or in the instance of Toretsk, pushing them back. So that's the only one I could figure out. And look, I dug through Kursk like 5 times over. And I did a documentary about Sumy and the Kursk incursion not too long ago. It's on my channel. In fact, I'll put it up on the screen while we're doing this because, you know, support independent filmmakers, right? But I went through those contacts. I tried to figure something. I can't find anything. And so the only conclusion I can come to is that after this meeting that Donald Trump had, he was told in that meeting that they were surrounded in Kursk and that, you know, thousands of Ukrainians are about to die, and he just took it at face value. I mean, what's the other conclusion? I'm trying to figure something out. I'm trying to figure out, like, maybe right-wing Twitter. Maybe he was on right-wing Twitter and he saw somebody like Cat Turd say, like, the Ukrainians are surrounded because they don't understand the situation around Kursk. The best case scenario here is that Donald Trump was on, like, QAnon.com or Truth Social on Twitter or wherever, and he just saw, like, you know what, I heard the Ukrainians are surrounded, and so he's adding that on top of the meeting. The worst case scenario, which I also think is the likely scenario considering he just said, I just left a meeting with Vladimir Putin, is that the Russians told him in that meeting, hey, Ukrainians are surrounded in Kursk. You can see they're running away. Here's a cool picture of Putin in a military garb, military uniform. They're surrounded. We'll let them withdraw. We'll let these thousands and thousands of men run away as a display of our peaceful intentions. All you have to do is make sure Ukraine does not mobilize any more people and make sure no more aid is sent to Ukraine. That's my suspicion. And I'm just leading with my suspicion here because all of my alarms are going off. And while I cannot confirm that's what happened in the meeting, I cannot confirm that's where Trump imagined a military encirclement. I mean, look, 100% encircled, completely surrounded. That was his statement. You can look at the most recently available Ukraine map information. If you don't believe any of my sources that they're not surrounded in Kursk, or don't believe any of the other people who are confirmed soldiers in Kursk who are testifying right now that they're not surrounded in Kursk. And let me tell you something. If there's anything that the Ukrainian soldier can do, it is complain about how shit their command is. They have plenty of material. But this is not surrounded. You see what this is? This is a withdrawal. They are retreating. This is what you would call a retreat, not surrounded. And now you can see after they've retreated outside of Sudza, they're still there. They're still in Kursk. They're probably just still in Kursk, either in part to see maybe what they can hold on to, or they want to make sure that their withdrawal, which is maybe not complete, is done in an organized fashion. And so they've deployed more troops here to hold the line while the rest of them withdraw. Either way, there is no way you can describe what is going on here as they are completely surrounded. Completely surrounded would be if that curling behind the line that happened earlier during the offensives. I wonder if I can find that curling. But there was a curling behind the line around here. If this was to cross to here, like this, and then these troops were trapped here, then boom, they're surrounded. That, I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of just talking about basic object permanence here. I don't want to get like the rulers out and the lines out and like, here's what it looks like when you're surrounded. You guys know what it looks like when you're surrounded. That means there'd be a blue spot somewhere completely surrounded by red. That's what it would look like. And you want to know what? That never happened. It never happened. They retreated after the United States cut off intelligence and military aid, and the intelligence support, which with our satellite information, with private companies like Maxer that was, telling the Ukrainians where the Russians were. We stopped providing that support. The Russians then went full overdrive trying to take advantage of the situation from their public statements. That's what the Russians have said, trying to take advantage of the withdrawals. This is said both in their published state newspapers. This is said both in their state publications on the news. This says, like, their news TV channels. This is said by the bloggers. This is said by everyone, that they wanted to take advantage of the situation. Now, whether it was cumulative pressure, or it was the intelligence withdrawal, or it was the Ukrainians thinking, well, we'd have to deploy even more troops to hold this area, and now we know that American aid is shaky under Trump. It's just not worth it anymore. We need as many men as possible to defend back in Ukraine. Whatever it was, the Ukrainians started to retreat. Not get surrounded, retreat. They prevented getting surrounded. They prevented that from happening. So I just need to be 100% clear, because I don't know if the mainstream news channels like CNN and MSNBC are going to go into enough detail to probably explain that this is just a lie. This is Donald Trump lying about Ukraine, pretending they're surrounded by an imaginary army. There is an imaginary army surrounding another imaginary Ukrainian army in Donald Trump's head that he's verbalizing to the public. And let me tell you, if you're watching this right now, if you even stumbled in here somehow, if you were watching like I Show Speed 5 seconds ago and you somehow like fell asleep, passed out, stream ended, passed over here, I have no clue. But you know more than the average person about what's going on in Ukraine. The average person has no clue about the frontline situation. There's been 3 years of frontline updates. 3 years of it. And there's so many different parts of the front that's active right now that they don't know. So if the president of the United States waddles out of bed, takes out his phone, or waddles out of a meeting with the president of Russia and pulls out his phone and tweets out or truths out on his social media platform, Truth Social, what a fucking stupid name. and he truths out, oh, you know, the Ukrainians are surrounded. People don't know. People don't know. Dylan, there is 2 roads and all of them are in artillery's reach. It is an encirclement of sort. Shut up. I'm sorry. No excuses. There's no excuses for this. If that's the case, then the Ukrainians have been encircled in Kursk for months. If that's the case, then the Ukrainians are encircled in many other locations and the Russians are encircled in many other locations. When he says encircled, 100% encircled. He's not saying, hey, what we mean is that the road into Kursk is under fire control, so the Russians can fire at it when they come in and out. So maybe like 20% or 25% of the men might become casualties. That's not what he's saying. He's saying 100% completely surrounded. No excuses. No excuses. Don't make excuses for it. This is not an encirclement. He's lying to the American public on behalf of the Russians. For what reason? Is it because he's stupid and he's a useful idiot? Or is it because he thinks the easiest way to end the war is by just forcing terms on the weaker state? And I mean, when you listen to Trump talk about Ukraine, I mean, it does sound like that. When he says like Ukraine doesn't have any cards. For example, let me find this. Trump was just having a meeting right after this. He was talking about this too. One second. Here it is.
Russia has a large group of Ukrainian soldiers, as we speak, surrounded and in grave danger. They've been able to surround them. They're in grave danger. Biden should have never let this war happen. First of all, you don't want to pick on somebody that's a lot larger than you, even with the money. There's a lot of money that we gave them and a lot of equipment. We make the best military equipment in the world, but even with all of that, it's unbelievable. Right now, you have a lot of Ukrainian soldiers that are encircled and in grave danger, and I've asked them not to kill those soldiers, please, not to kill those soldiers.
A curd is a curd.
It's that simple. They're bigger. They're bigger, and he's friendly with Putin. It's really, it can be that base. It can be that simple. It can be that base. They're not encircled. The Ukrainians are performing a organized withdrawal from Kursk. They're retreating, but they're not getting encircled. There's no threat of encirclement. The Russians have had the road in and out of Kursk under fire control for months. If you don't look, do I have to just? There are people that will just distrust me because I'm not a Trumper. If you go out, these are the roads in the Kursk. Look, you see the roads in the Kursk? They're no more or less under fire control than they were. Look, if you go back, they're still under the same fire control. It's still range. They can still bomb it. And if you go, you can even see there's certain days, like in February, where they like beat the shit out of the road. And like, look at this day, February 25th. Look how many vehicles. Look at all of this. Look at all of this. Oh my gosh. That's a lot of damage. The Ukrainians were losing a lot of men in Kursk. The Russians were also losing a lot of men in Kursk. But if this is what he meant, then it's been like this for months. It's a bad day for the motor pool. But the Ukrainians wanted the leverage that comes with Kursk, and also probably like the fact that they were bringing the war over into Russia and they were not fighting over Ukrainian cities. And there were sacrifices that came with that. But this is not what he's saying, completely surrounded. He's lying about what's going on here. He's lying about the military situation. He's misinforming the public with the largest platform available. The United States people are not going to go online. Americans aren't going to go online and be like, oh, what's Operator Starsky saying about the front? Oh, what's Dylan Burns saying about the front? Oh, what's so-and-so saying about the front? Preston Stewart or whoever, this English, they're not doing that. They're not going to go look at the Ukraine Daily Updates map. They're not going to do what we're doing here. There are millions upon millions of Americans who now believe, probably tens of millions of Americans, who now believe that there is an imaginary Ukrainian army somewhere surrounded, and when that imaginary Ukrainian army does not get completely annihilated, because it doesn't exist, Trump will signal it was a goodwill gesture. You're making a lot of assumptions, Dylan, like that Trump knows what a circle is. I didn't know how the Trump administration was going to respond to what happened, and with Ukraine offering a ceasefire and the Russians basically rejecting it. I thought there was not a lot of room for him to basically bend over for that without humiliation, and I still believe that. I currently believe that Trump is humiliating himself. I do. I believe Trump is currently humiliating himself. And I think the American people see it. And I think the world sees it. And Trump's entire message was, on foreign policy, peace through strength. That we did not have respect on the world stage, that Obama and Biden and the limp-wristed, weak-willed Democrats with all their woke nonsense and endless foreign aid and just, selling America out to foreigners had abandoned the American people for the globalist agenda. And that he was going to go on the world stage and he was going to make America respected through peace through strength. Not by surrendering to all of America's adversaries, but by going in there and giving them hard deals. But he's the deal maker. He's going to get the stuff done because he can look a man in the eye and shake their hand, but he'll get a strong deal because he's a deal maker and he knows how to negotiate. Now, he never did that during his first term when it comes to the Democrats. He never negotiated a deal on healthcare. He never negotiated an infrastructure deal. He never negotiated a deal on lowering healthcare prices. He never negotiated really much of any deal. He did get taxes through, but he was not a big, let's say, compromiser in chief. He was not a big deal maker in chief like he advertises himself. But if he can't be the deal maker in chief at home when it comes to, the Democrats, he has to be a deal maker somewhere. That order of the deal has to be used somewhere. And so it is used on the foreign policy stage, where he's going to look Putin in the eye, a strong man, look at another strong man, shake hands, and just get this war over with because everybody wants the killing to stop. That was the advertisement. And now what the American people see is instead the United States bullying Ukraine, saying, "Oh, you can't pick on Russia. You can't pick on Russia. And you should have never. You started the war. You helped start the war. And why aren't you saying thank you after they said thank you at the start of the meeting? And we're gonna cut off not only all the financial aid, not only all the military aid, but we're also gonna cut off all the intelligence support, and we're gonna give up everything that the Russians want before negotiations even start. No NATO membership? Sure. Why not? We're not going to ask for the kidnapped children to be returned. The 19,000 kidnapped children, many of whom have already been adopted out to Russian families, their families not knowing where they are. The Ukrainian government that have to look out for these orphans, not knowing where they went when they were taken, literally kidnapped from orphanages as they were withdrawing from places like Kherson. And these people who manage the orphanages were trying to hide the children in closets. What's going to happen to those kids? We got nothing in return. We just gave it up for nothing. For nothing. We also gave up military deployments in Ukraine. A deployment of 200, 300 U.S. Marines could have a lot of political weight, a lot of weight behind deterrence. And even if you don't want that, you know what you do? You say, hey, we won't do that if you give us this. That's how you do smart negotiating. Make them have to give up something for something you don't even want in the first place. That's smart negotiating. Nothing. Just give that up. Just give that up too. Oh, also, Ukraine can't be at the negotiating table. And look, I warned about this. I warned about it with the ANA and the Afghan National Army that we might see a repeat with Ukraine, and this has been a big Russian demand. And you know what we saw? We saw what 91% of Ukrainians didn't want and them excluded from that table in Saudi Arabia. Now they've had the one-on-one talks with the United States. Now it seems like America's the intermediary instead of the person backing up Ukraine, lessening their leverage. And I think the Russians noticed this, and they've made note of this, and they want this, especially since the Europeans could also then be excluded from the conversation. Another group of nations backing up Ukraine. And this doesn't really feel like peace through strength at all. This feels like peace through concession, and then peace through telling your allies to concede. This doesn't feel like peace through strength at all. Peace through strength would be not, hey, I might tariff you. Hey, I might sanction you later. Not yet, but maybe later. Also, let's talk about getting rid of sanctions. But also, I might sanction you. But also, let's talk about getting rid of sanctions. That's not peace through strength. You're not showing economic strength. You're not showing military strength. You're not showing strength and support. You're not showing a will to stand with Ukraine. If you don't make your negotiating opponent think you can walk away from the table, they're going to take you for everything that's on the table. And that's what Donald Trump's doing right now. And look, you don't believe me? You don't believe that's what I think the American people are seeing from this war? I understand that. I'm very, invested in the war. You might not take my word from it. Let's look at some polling data that's recently come out. Most Americans disapprove of Trump's approach to the Ukraine war, doubt it will yield peace. Americans are skeptical that President Donald Trump's approach to the war between Russia and Ukraine will bring peace to the region, according to a new CNN poll conducted by SSRS. Most Americans view Trump's handling of the conflict negatively, and 50% say his approach to the war is bad for the United States. U.S. diplomats are currently working to persuade Russia to agree to a temporary ceasefire in the war that has dragged on for more than 3 years since Russia's invasion. While the Biden administration strongly backed Ukraine and unambiguously blamed Russia for the conflict, Trump has blamed Ukraine for causing the war and called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a dictator, drawing complaints from European allies and domestic critics. CNN's latest poll finds that 59% of Americans think it's not too likely or not likely at all that Trump's approach will bring long-term peace between Russia and Ukraine, while 41% say that it's at least somewhat likely. More broadly, nearly 6 in 10 Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of U.S. relations with Russia, and 55% disapprove of the handling of the situation in Ukraine. Half of Americans think Trump's approach to the war between Russia and Ukraine is bad for the United States, compared to 29%. 29%. We're talking 2 to 1. We're talking 2 to 1 margins compared to only 29%. Trump's lost MAGA in some of this. To be clear, 33% of Americans are like hardcore Trumpers, die Trump. These are the hardcore MAGAers. They're never going to leave him. They're going to vote for him in every election. They think he's in there to, purge the deep state. He's really with them. And even if some of them might break with him on one issue or another issue a little bit, they're with him. He started to lose some of those people. 29%. 29% think his approach to the war is good for the United States. This mirrors America's broader views of Trump's foreign policy moves so far in his second term. While 30% says his decisions have helped America's standing in the world, more than half, 54%, say they've hurt America's standing. Really? You mean the American public that elected him based on the economy did not want to see him implement a bunch of tariffs that hurts their bottom dollar when they're at the grocery store, and not only hurts the bottom dollar, but then watch him try to humiliate our biggest allies on the world stage, making us look like a thug, talking about conquering Greenland? You think Barbara in Iowa cares about conquering Greenland? No, she cares about the price of groceries. A sizable share of Republicans expressed doubt about Trump's approach to foreign policy, including 15% who see his foreign policy decisions as having hurt America's standing in the world. That's the people he lost. 18% who says his approach to the war between Russia and Ukraine is bad for the U.S., and 28% who believe his approach is unlikely to result in a long-term peace between the two countries. Democrats are more unified around negative views of Trump's foreign policy choices. Who would have thought? Look, the American public see through it. Now, I think the risk for Trump is this margin continuing to grow. Mind you, the negotiations have not started. The negotiations have not even started yet. You got Ukraine to agree to a ceasefire by bullying Ukraine. Guess what? The American public did not like to watch the United States bully a liberalizing democracy that's getting invaded by a country that is our historic rival. Who would have thought? They're not vibing with that, okay? Okay, no big surprise. But we haven't even started negotiating yet. So we've given all this up. The American people don't like it. They don't like the bullying of Ukraine. The longer this goes on, what are we going to do? Before negotiations, are we going to have to go back to the Ukrainians and also demand these non-concedable items? Like, no more mobilization. You can't prepare to defend yourself in case this fails. You have to just stay frozen and just hope that that Trump's diplomatic acumen succeeds. That the vast majority of the American public don't believe it's going to succeed. Only 29% of Americans thinks that this is going to work. Barely 1 in 4 Americans have trust that this is going to work. And when the American public, the people that elected the man, don't even trust him to do this, to see it through, you expect the Ukrainians to base their children's safety on this when the American people don't even trust it? Come on. Of course the Ukrainians can't stop mobilization during the ceasefire process if the Russians don't stop mobilizing people or they don't stop recruiting new people. Of course the Ukrainians cannot stop taking in foreign aid if the Russians are going to keep taking in North Korean shells and North Korean soldiers are fighting on the front line. And by the way, the punishment that was put forward by the United States for those North Korean soldiers, that was retracted long ago. The long-range strikes with the ATACMS. That's what Biden did in response to that. Something that Trump said that he shouldn't have done. What motivation would the North Koreans or the Russians have for not putting the pedal on the metal when it comes to North Korean participation in the war? This is not peace through strength. They don't look like they have an interest, a long-term interest in Ukraine. They don't look like they have any commitment to Ukraine. They look weak. They look like they're willing to concede before the negotiations start. When the negotiations start, let's say that Trump makes Ukraine concede even more, and the negotiations start, or even concede no more. Negotiations start after a pebble, a microscopic atom of courage or bravery comes in, and there's no more concessions before negotiations begin. What do you think is going to happen in negotiations? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think the Russians are going to all of a sudden be like, okay, now that we got all of the stuff we wanted, now we're going to concede on territory. Now, since we got the NATO stuff, since we got everything else, now you can have Mariupol back. Oh, sure, yeah, you can have the rest of Kherson and Zaporizhia back. We'll go back to 2022 lines because we stopped NATO expansion, which everybody who's, gone about the Trumpian apologia for Russia on this has said is the main concern. Is that going to happen? I don't think it is. They're going to have maximalist demands for territory because the only thing I see right now is the Russians not even accepting current lines. They still want more. They still want Zaporizhia. They still want Kherson across the Dnieper River, across one of Ukraine's natural fortifications, the Dnieper River, which has helped protect a lot of the west of the country from seeing the worst of the war post 2023. They would still want Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, Sloviansk. We're gonna tell the Ukrainians they have to evacuate all these cities and hand it over to the Russians? Do you think the Russians, if they take over all those cities, all those families with connections to Ukrainian political society or civil society in any way, or would be willing to criticize the new authorities, you think they're going to be able to live there peacefully? That's not what happened in Crimea. The Crimean activists found the families of Crimean activists found their bodies bloated, floating down the river. So is that something, not only is that something that's like, is that something that we should even dignify? Is that something that the Ukrainians could even physically accept and expect their country to stay united? Is that something we could expect to push through and expect Zelensky's government not to collapse? Not that Trump really cares if his government collapsed, because he hates Zelensky, it's seemingly. They're trying to see if they can get somebody else in there, somebody be more agreeable to their terms. Because again, it's easier to pressure allies that depend on you than it is to pressure geopolitical opponents. So he's just taking the easy way out, not the hardball, peace through strength, negotiating way out. The American people don't believe in it. The Ukrainians don't believe in it. I'm still looking. I'm still searching. I'm still searching for some avenue for Trump to have a brain molecule on this negotiating process. I mean, how can you force the victim that was invaded to stop preparing defenses while the attacker continues to push forward with its aggression? How can you say that's a good response? Golden domes in the White House. Elon retweeted a certainly hot take about the Holocaust. Oh no.